The storm had come suddenly, as storms often did on the wide, unforgiving prairie. Dark clouds churned overhead and a fierce wind whipped through the tall grasses, bending them like waves of green. Clara's horse, startled by a flash of lightning, bolted across the uneven ground. She gripped the reins with desperate hands, her heart hammering in her chest, but there was nothing she could do to slow the panicked animal. A sudden dip in the terrain threw her violently from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding in her back as she lay sprawled in the mud. The horse bolted off into the distance, leaving her alone, bruised and unable to move. She tried to sit, then to stand, but her legs refused to obey. Panic surged through her. She was miles from the nearest town, miles from help, and the rain began to fall in icy sheets, soaking her through. Her cries were swallowed by the howling wind. By the time she lost consciousness, her thoughts were a jumble of fear and despair. She dreamed of being trapped in darkness, unable to move, helpless against the relentless world around her. When she finally awoke, it was to the soft crunch of footsteps in the mud. He appeared like a shadow from the storm, tall, muscular, and unmistakably an Apache warrior. His dark eyes were steady and assessing, taking in her battered form without a hint of fear. His voice, low and calm, carried over the storm. "Can you move?" he asked. She shook her head, her pride and despair colliding. I think I'm broken," she whispered, fear and shame mixing in her throat. "I'll never walk again." He said nothing, only crouched beside her and assessed the situation. Without a word, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. His strength was extraordinary, his movements precise and careful. Clara gasped at the ease with which he carried her, half in awe and half in terror. She tried to protest, but he ignored her, murmuring softly, "You will not be left here. I will not let you die in the storm." The ride was perilous. He carried her on his back at first, then hoisted her onto his horse with practiced skill. Clara clung to him, feeling the steady rhythm of the animal's gait and the warmth of his body pressed against hers. Every step was a reminder of her fragility, every mile a testament to his determination. The wind lashed at them and rain stung her skin, but Dakota, the name he later told her, moved with unwavering confidence through the treacherous terrain. Along the way, he spoke little, only giving her guidance and quiet reassurance. "Hold on," he said when the ground grew rough. "We are almost there." And though she couldn't see the path ahead clearly, she trusted him. Trust, she realized, was the only lifeline she had left in a world that had seemed determined to abandon her. Hours passed. Her body ached, her spirits wavered, but Dakota never faltered. Finally, as the storm began to abate, the outline of a small camp appeared through the mist, a place of safety, warmth, and light. He carried her the last few yards and set her gently on a bed of furs. Clara's chest heaved, tears mingling with rain on her cheeks. She looked at him, gratitude and disbelief warring in her gaze. You saved me," she whispered. He nodded, his face unreadable but his eyes soft. "You are not finished yet. You will survive," he said, almost as if speaking to the earth itself. In that moment, Clara realized that everything had changed. Her life, once defined by independence and self-reliance, now depended on this stranger who had appeared from the storm. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, a strange, unspoken hope took root. Perhaps she could survive. Perhaps she could even heal. And perhaps in the shadow of the fiercest storm she had ever faced, she had found someone she could trust with her life and her heart. The morning after the storm, Clara awoke to a soft golden light filtering through the canvas of the small makeshift shelter Dakota had built. Her body ached in ways she had never known, each movement a sharp reminder of her fall. But it wasn't pain alone that held her captive, it was fear. Fear that she would never walk again, that her life had been reduced to endless dependence on strangers and circumstance. Dakota was already awake, tending a small fire and preparing a sparse breakfast of dried meat and water. He moved with quiet efficiency, each gesture deliberate and steady. Seeing him there, so calm and controlled, gave Clara a small measure of comfort. She could feel his presence like a protective wall around her fragile world. "Can you sit?" he asked gently, his deep voice soft against the morning stillness. She shook her head, ashamed of her helplessness. I don't know if I can. My legs, they don't seem to work." He nodded, understanding without judgment. "Then we start slow. There is no hurry. The land teaches patience, and so must we." Dakota lifted her carefully, supporting her weight as she tested the muscles in her legs. Her knees trembled, Her breath came in short gasps and tears pricked her eyes. But he remained unwavering, his hands firm but gentle, his eyes steady and encouraging. "You can do this." Step by step, he murmured. Their journey began that day. Dakota carried her over rivers swollen with rainwater, through dense forest where branches clawed at their clothes, and across rocky hills that seemed impossible to traverse. All the while, Clara clung to him, learning to trust not just his strength but his patience, his steadiness, and the calm certainty that he would never let her fall again. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were deliberate, filled with wisdom and quiet humor. He showed her how to read the wind, how to find edible plants, how to follow the tracks of animals for hunting. Each lesson was a reminder that the world, harsh as it was, could also be gentle if one approached it with respect and awareness. Clara felt herself opening, not just to him but to the vast, untamed land around her. Despite the danger and discomfort of the journey, Clara began to feel a strange sense of freedom. She had always lived in towns and cities where the walls of buildings and the judgments of people confined her. Out here, carried on Dakota's strong back, she glimpsed a world larger than her fears. She realized that survival required trust, and trust required vulnerability. And though it frightened her, it also stirred something new, something like hope. One evening, as they set camp beside a quiet stream, Dakota helped her down from the horse and placed her gently on a bed of furs. The sun dipped behind distant ridges, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. She looked up at him, and for a moment the harshness of the past weeks fell away. "You've carried me so far," she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "I don't even know your name." "Dakota," he replied simply. "It means friend." The simplicity of the word struck her. Friend, protector, guide. Somehow it seemed to fit him perfectly. She realized then that he had become more than a rescuer. He was the only person who had truly seen her, entirely, without judgment or fear. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars blinked awake above them, Clara drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. She was exhausted, bruised, and still uncertain about the future. Yet in the warmth of Dakota's presence, she felt a quiet certainty for the first time in her life. She was not alone. She would survive, and perhaps, just perhaps, she would learn to walk again, not only across the prairie, but into a life filled with trust, courage, and the possibility of love. And so, the journey continued, each day a testament to resilience, each mile a bridge between fear and hope, and each moment a subtle step toward something deeper than mere survival, toward a bond neither of them could yet fully name. The sun was low on the horizon when Dakota finally led Clara to the edge of a hidden valley. Nestled among gentle hills and framed by groves of cottonwood trees, the Apache village seemed almost suspended in time. Smoke curled lazily from a handful of lodges, and the soft murmur of voices carried across the evening air. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a flicker of relief. They had reached a place of safety, a sanctuary from the harsh expanse of prairie that had tested her so severely. Dakota dismounted first, extending his hand to help her down. She trembled slightly as her feet touched the soft earth, unsteady despite the progress she had made. Her legs had yet to regain full strength, but there was something in the village's quiet order that made the world feel steadier, more manageable. The villagers approached cautiously. Their eyes, dark and observant, lingered on her with a mix of curiosity and caution. Whispers passed between them, swift and low, as Dakota introduced her. "She is injured," he said simply. "She will stay with us until she can walk again." Clara felt their scrutiny like a tangible weight, but she also sensed the respect in their demeanor. In Dakota's presence, none of them questioned her worth. He carried her here, had protected her, and that was enough. Slowly, their suspicion softened into acceptance. One woman, older and sharp-eyed, stepped forward and offered a small nod of welcome. Inside the lodge, Dakota made sure Clara was comfortable, settling her onto a bed of furs and blankets. He prepared a small meal, insisting she eat despite her hesitance. Clara watched him, noting the quiet care in each movement, the way he arranged the blankets around her, the way he poured water into a cup just out of reach so she could take it herself. There was a dignity in his service, a profound respect for her autonomy even as he carried the burden of her care. The first few days were an adjustment. The villagers taught Clara the ways of their life, how to gather herbs for healing, how to cook over open fires, how to move safely with her weakened legs. Dakota guided her patiently, never allowing her to attempt more than she could manage. There were moments of frustration, when her body refused to obey, when fear threatened to overwhelm her, but he was always there, steady, calm, unwavering. Slowly, the routine brought Clara a sense of belonging she had never known. The Apache villagers were not merely witnesses to her injury. They were participants in her recovery. They celebrated small victories, like the first time she managed to move from the bed to a chair without assistance, and offered quiet encouragement when progress faltered. Each gesture, no matter how small, reminded her that she was not alone. Dakota, too, began to reveal himself beyond the role of protector. There were glimpses of humor in his rare smiles, warmth in the way he spoke to children, a quiet pride in teaching her survival skills. At night, he would sit near the fire while she rested, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats, yet also lingering on her with a softness that made her pulse quicken. She found herself observing him in return, noticing the scar that ran along his forearm, the curve of his strong jaw, the way his presence seemed to anchor the lodge against the uncertainty of the world outside. One evening, as the last light of day faded, Dakota helped her to a nearby stream. She held onto his arm, feeling the cool water lap at her trembling legs. Step by step, he murmured, echoing the words he had used weeks before. And this time she did. Not far, not long, but enough to feel the thrill of independence returning. For the first time since the accident, Clara allowed herself a moment of hope. She realized that this village, this life, and this man who had carried her across the prairie might be the beginning of something far more profound than survival alone. And though she did not yet know what the future held, she understood that her journey, both physical and emotional, was only just beginning. In the quiet of the night, as the village settled and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, Clara closed her eyes with a sense of fragile yet unwavering trust. She was not merely a guest in Dakota's world. She was becoming a part of it. And he, the silent, steadfast warrior who had carried her through the storm, was no longer simply her protector. He was the anchor of her new life. Days in the village settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and comforting to Clara. Each morning she woke to the soft light filtering through the lodge, the scent of burning sage and wood smoke filling the air. Dakota was always nearby, sometimes tending the fire, sometimes watching over the children as they ran through the clearing, but always present, a steady force in the midst of a world that had once seemed so hostile. At first, Clara's interactions with him were purely practical. He guided her through her exercises to regain strength, adjusted the splints and supports on her legs, and carried her when the terrain proved too difficult. But gradually their connection shifted. The quiet moments, the ones spent gathering herbs together, repairing fences, or simply sitting by the fire in the evenings, began to feel different. Clara noticed the way Dakota's eyes lingered on her, the careful consideration in his movements, the rare, almost imperceptible smile when she made a small breakthrough. One afternoon, as they collected water from a stream hidden behind a thicket of willows, Clara stumbled on a moss-covered rock. Instinctively, Dakota was there, steadying her with his strong hands. His thumb brushed against hers as he helped her regain balance, and a jolt of something unfamiliar surged through her chest. She looked up at him, and for the first time she felt the weight of his gaze, not as a protector, but as a man. "You are stronger than you think," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "Every day you surprise me." Clara's lips parted, unsure how to respond. She had always equated strength with independence, but now she realized strength could exist even in vulnerability. Dakota had shown her that. It was not just the physical carrying, the protection through storms and rough terrain. It was his unwavering belief in her, his refusal to allow her despair to define her. Back at the lodge, they shared quiet meals. Clara learned to cook simple meals over the fire, and Dakota taught her the subtle art of using herbs not just for sustenance but for healing. She watched him work, admiring his skill, the precision of his hands, the calm authority in everything he did. Slowly, she began to speak more freely, sharing fragments of her past, her family, her fears, her sense of failure. Dakota listened without judgment, his presence a comforting anchor as her words flowed. In return, he shared stories of his own life, the loneliness of the prairie, the loss he had endured, and the pride he carried in protecting his people. Evenings were the hardest. When the village quieted and the children slept, Clara found herself aware of the space between them. the subtle brush of shoulders or hands, as Dakota assisted her with simple tasks. There was a tension there, unspoken yet palpable, a sense that something more could exist if only they acknowledged it. But fear held her back. The fear of dependence, the fear of feelings she barely understood, and the fear of a future she could not yet see. One night, as the fire crackled and the stars emerged over the village, Dakota helped her to a small platform by the river where she could try walking with support. Her legs trembled, but he stood close, guiding her, ready to catch her if she faltered. When she reached a few steps on her own, he nodded, a small but proud smile breaking the usual calm of his face. "You see," he murmured, "you are learning. You are alive in ways you never imagined." Clara felt a warmth rise within her, not just from the accomplishment but from the quiet pride in his eyes. For the first time since her accident, she realized that her dependence on him was not shameful. It was a bridge, a bond, a connection that went deeper than gratitude or survival. It was trust, and it was mutual. That night, as she lay wrapped in blankets, Clara found herself listening for the sound of his steps in the lodge. She imagined his presence beside her, a protective shadow and something more, a companion, a confidant, perhaps even a love that had been quietly growing in the spaces between words, gestures, and shared silences. She realized that Dakota had carried her not just through the wilderness, but into the possibility of a new life, one where fear no longer dictated her every choice. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope, not just for recovery, but for a future she could walk into, hand in hand with the man who had shown her that even in weakness there could be strength, and even in dependence there could be love. The village had grown quiet after a long day of work. Smoke curled from the lodges, children laughed in the distance, and the air was filled with the comforting sense of wood fire and cooking herbs. Clara felt a rare sense of peace as she sat beside the river, practicing the steps Dakota had shown her, her hands brushing the tall grasses as she moved. Each faltering step was a victory, each wobble a testament to her determination. But that peace was fragile. On the horizon, a plume of dust rose, twisting in the heat like a warning. Clara squinted against the glare of the sun and saw them, outsiders approaching the village on horseback. Ranchers from the nearby settlements, their faces hardened and eyes wary, had caught wind of the secluded Apache community. They were looking for trouble or perhaps for profit, and among them, Clara realized with a sinking heart, she herself might be considered an object of interest. Dakota noticed the dust at the same moment. His expression, usually calm and unreadable, tightened with resolve. He moved to her side, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You must stay behind," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Do not come with me if it is unsafe." Clara shook her head, a flash of stubbornness igniting within her. "I cannot just stay here while you face them. I want to help even if I cannot fight." His eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the danger in them. "You are learning strength, but not all battles are won by brute force. Trust me." He led her back into the lodge, motioning for the villagers to prepare. Some of the younger warriors grabbed weapons while others secured the entrances. Quietly but efficiently, Clara watched from the shadows, anxiety gnawing at her. She wanted to do something, anything, but her body still betrayed her, refusing to move as she wished. The outsiders arrived, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they reached the edge of the village. Their leader, a tall man with a cruel streak evident in his sharp gaze, shouted demands. "Come out. We know she's here. That woman belongs to the town, not this tribe." Clara's heart clenched at the accusation. The fear and helplessness she had felt since the accident surged anew. But then she felt Dakota's hand brush against hers, steadying, anchoring. He did not hesitate. He stepped forward, placing himself between the intruders and the village. "She is safe here," he said calmly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. What followed was a tense standoff. The outsiders threatened and jeered, but Dakota remained immovable, his presence alone enough to give the villagers courage. When one of the men tried to push forward, Dakota reacted swiftly, intercepting him with strength and precision that left no doubt he would not be crossed. Clara watched, awe and fear battling within her, as the man was thrown back without harm but with unmistakable authority. At one point, one of the outsiders attempted to grab her from behind. Clara froze, panic threatening to paralyze her. But before anything could happen, Dakota was there, his arms around her in an unyielding shield. He moved with her, positioning her safely behind him. then used his body and his voice to ensure she remained protected while the intruders retreated, intimidated by his sheer presence and the unity of the village. After the dust settled, Clara's legs shook, not from exertion but from adrenaline and relief. Dakota led her back to the lodge, his hands never leaving her arms for long. "You see?" he said quietly. "Strength is not always in moving alone. Sometimes it is in standing together, in trusting someone to carry you when you cannot carry yourself." Clara looked up at him, her chest tight with emotion. He had carried her through storms, across deserts, and now through fear itself. And she realized that this dependence, far from being shameful, had become a bond, a connection forged through survival, trust, and unwavering courage. That night, as the village settled once more into quiet calm, Clara allowed herself a new understanding. She was no longer just a girl who had fallen from a horse and feared she would never walk again. She was someone learning to live, learning to trust, and learning, through Dakota's strength and devotion, what it meant to be truly protected, cherished and loved. And deep in her heart, she knew that whatever threats lay ahead, they would face them together. Weeks passed since the incident at the village's edge, and Clara's progress, though slow, became undeniable. Each day she grew stronger, her muscles remembering movement they had long forgotten, her mind learning to trust her legs again. Dakota never pushed her beyond her limits, but he was always there, watching, steadying, guiding, encouraging. His presence had become as vital to her as the air she breathed, and she realized with a mixture of awe and warmth how much she had come to rely on him. One morning, Dakota led her to a small clearing near the river, the ground soft and forgiving. He had prepared a makeshift cane from a sturdy branch, smooth and polished, and placed it carefully in her hands. "Today," he said, his deep voice calm, "you will take steps on your own. I will be right here, but these steps must be yours." Clara's heart pounded at the thought. For weeks she had depended on him entirely, and now the idea of moving without his full support both thrilled and terrified her. She gripped the cane tightly, feeling the familiar tremor of fear in her legs. Dakota knelt beside her, adjusting her stance, his hands steady on her waist. "Remember," he murmured, step by step. "Do not rush. Trust yourself." She took a tentative step forward, her toes brushing the grass, her muscles screaming with the unfamiliar strain. Dakota's hands were there instantly, ready to catch her if she faltered. But he offered only guidance, not force. She took another step, then another, her confidence growing, though her breath came in shallow, anxious gasps. "You see?" Dakota said softly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You are walking, not as I carry you, but as yourself. That is strength." For the first time in months, Clara felt a surge of triumph. Tears pricked her eyes and she stumbled slightly, but Dakota's steady hands held her upright. I can do it," she whispered, disbelief mixing with exhilaration. "Yes," he replied. "You can do more than you think." They practiced for hours that day, the sun climbing higher in the sky, warming the clearing and casting long shadows over the tall grasses. Each step was a victory, each falter a lesson in patience and resilience. Dakota remained patient, never scolding, never letting frustration show. His unwavering belief in her ability became a force in itself, propelling her forward even when her body resisted. As they rested by the river, Dakota knelt beside her, gently massaging the tension from her legs. The warmth of his hands, the quiet care in his touch made Clara acutely aware of the closeness between them. Her heart fluttered at the intimacy, a tender ache that had nothing to do with her injury and everything to do with the man who had become her anchor. "You have come far," he said, his voice low and steady, almost reverent. "Not just in walking, but in trusting. You allow yourself to be seen, to be helped. That is courage, Clara." She looked at him, startled by the depth of his words. It was as if he could see into the very core of her, recognizing strength where she had only felt weakness. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her cheeks flushed. "You do not need to say anything," he replied. "Actions speak louder. You are walking step by step, and that is enough." As the days turned into weeks, Clara's steps became longer, her balance surer, and her confidence stronger. She began to explore the village with only occasional support, marveling at the world from a height she had long forgotten. And through it all, Dakota remained by her side, not as a crutch, but as a companion, a partner in every sense. One evening, after a long day of walking and gathering herbs, Clara sat by the fire watching Dakota tend it. She realized with a warmth that made her chest ache that she no longer felt helpless. She had regained something more than the ability to walk. She had regained hope, trust, and a connection that went deeper than gratitude. In the quiet of the night, with the stars blinking above the village, she reached for his hand, feeling the strength and reassurance in his grip. For the first time since the accident, she knew she could move forward, not just across the prairie, but into a life filled with courage, companionship, and love. And Dakota, ever silent but profoundly present, squeezed her hand in return, a promise without words. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The night had fallen softly over the village, and the air was cool with the scent of sage and burning wood. Inside the lodge, Clara sat cross-legged on a mat, her legs no longer trembling as they had in the early days. Dakota moved around the fire, sharpening a small knife, his movements precise and fluid. Yet his eyes frequently flicked toward her. There was a quiet intimacy in these shared moments, a comfort that had grown alongside her strength. Yet neither spoke of the bond that had been quietly forming. Clara broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. I never told anyone about my family," she admitted, staring into the fire. "After my accident, I thought they wouldn't understand. They would see me as weak, useless. I couldn't face them." Dakota stopped his work and sat beside her, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft. "You do not need to explain yourself to anyone who does not matter," he said. "What you have endured, it is your story and it is your strength." Clara swallowed hard, tears pricking her eyes. "But it feels like weakness sometimes. Depending on you, on anyone, it terrifies me. I've always been independent, and now I feel like I'm nothing without you." He reached out, resting a strong hand lightly over hers. "You are not nothing," he said, his voice low and steady like the river outside their lodge. "Strength is not always measured by what you can do alone. Sometimes strength is in letting someone help you, in trusting that they will not abandon you." Her gaze met his, and for a moment, she saw a reflection of herself in his eyes, a survivor who had carried burdens no one else could imagine, a man shaped by hardship yet softened by the courage to care for another. "And what about you?" she asked softly. You've been alone so long. Doesn't it scare you? Letting someone in?" Dakota's jaw tightened briefly, and he looked down at the fire. "I have walked the prairie alone for many years," he admitted. "It is easier, perhaps, to carry your own burdens. But with you, I find that I want to share mine, that I care for you in ways I cannot deny." Clara's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and fear flooding her. She had feared dependence, but now she realized that this connection, this intertwining of lives, was not weakness. It was something more profound. A recognition that two people could carry each other, not out of obligation but out of choice, trust, and love. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his hand. I care for you too," she whispered, the admission tasting like freedom on her tongue. "Even if I'm still afraid, even if I'm not fully healed." Dakota's lips curved into a faint, rare smile. He leaned closer, but not enough to break the delicate tension, not yet. "Then we will face the fear together," he said simply, "step by step as we have done with everything else. I will not leave you. Not now, not ever." The words settled between them like a promise carried on the wind, unspoken yet fully understood. Clara felt her heart lighten, a warmth spreading from her chest through her limbs. For the first time since her fall, she allowed herself to feel safe, not just from the physical dangers of the prairie, but from the emotional isolation that had haunted her for so long. They sat together in silence for a time, hands still touching, hearts quietly sinking in rhythm. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across the lodge walls, but the shadows could not touch the bond forming between them. Clara realized that Dakota's strength had always been more than his arms, more than his skill with survival. It was the steady presence, the unwavering belief in her, the willingness to carry not only her body but her fears, her pain, and now her heart. Finally, she rested her head against his shoulder, letting herself feel the profound safety of being with someone who would not let her fall. Physically or emotionally, Dakota held her close, silent but present, a constant that reassured her she was not alone in the world anymore. And in that quiet moment, Clara understood the depth of what they shared. Love born not from passion alone but from trust, resilience, and the courage to be vulnerable with one another. The morning air was crisp and still, A deceptive calm settling over the village. Clara had woken early, eager to practice her walking, and was making her way along the riverbank with Dakota's steadying hand when the first signs of trouble appeared. Smoke rose unnaturally from the far edge of the valley, curling in dark, ominous plumes against the pale blue sky. The sharp clatter of hooves followed, echoing across the hills. Dakota's expression hardened instantly. He placed himself between Clara and the direction of the threat, scanning the horizon. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice quiet but urgent. "Do not stray. Whatever comes, I will not let it reach you." Before Clara could respond, the intruders emerged, this time not mere curiosity seekers or opportunistic ranchers, but a band of raiders, hardened men with weapons gleaming in the sunlight. Clara's stomach churned with fear, and for a moment she felt the familiar helplessness rising inside her. Her legs trembled, refusing to obey her commands, and panic threatened to paralyze her. Dakota was immediately at her side. His hand brushed hers as he lifted her slightly, instinctively shifting her weight to ensure she could not be grabbed. "Clara," he murmured, "trust me. Move with me. I will carry you if I must." The raiders pressed closer, shouting threats, their horses pawing the ground, ready to trample anything in their path. Clara's heart raced, but she noticed something remarkable in Dakota, a calm, deadly precision. He did not hesitate. He scooped her up into his arms with the ease that had saved her countless times before, and within moments they were moving, swift, silent, and impossibly sure-footed through the woods and rocky terrain that bordered the village. Clara clung to him, the familiar warmth of his body a small comfort against the fear gripping her. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, the strength in his arms carrying not just her body but the weight of every danger they faced. She realized then that trust was no longer just an idea. It was a lifeline, a force tangible as his muscles flexed and moved to navigate the treacherous terrain. The raiders were persistent, but Dakota was relentless. He moved with an instinct born of years surviving alone in the wilderness, weaving through rocks, trees, and sudden drops without ever faltering. Clara's chest heaved as she tried to keep her own fear in check, but the terror was tempered by the profound reassurance of his presence. Each leap, each careful descent reminded her that she was not powerless. She had someone who would carry her through the world, literally and figuratively, and that knowledge steadied her in ways words never could. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Dakota set her down in a hidden alcove of the forest, a place known only to him. Her knees were weak, her breathing ragged, but she was safe. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face, his eyes scanning the horizon even as relief softened his expression. "You are safe," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to the earth itself. "No harm will come to you while I'm here." Clara looked at him, awe and gratitude mingling in her gaze. You risk everything for me," she whispered. "Why?" He regarded her steadily. "Because you are worth it," he replied simply. "Because I care for you. Because life is too short to let those who mean nothing control what happens to you." In that moment, Clara understood something vital. Her dependence on Dakota was no longer a weakness to fear. It was a bond forged through danger, trust, and unwavering devotion. He had carried her through storms, across deserts, and now through life-threatening peril. She realized the depth of what they shared went beyond survival. It was trust. It was love. It was the certainty that no matter what storms the world sent their way, they would face them together. That night, as the village settled once again, Clara rested close to Dakota, her head against his shoulder. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had begun to understand the strength that came from allowing someone to carry you when the world itself threatened to crush you. And in that quiet realization, her heart felt freer, braver, and more alive than it had since the day she fell from her horse. The weeks following the raid were transformative. Clara had regained much of her strength and mobility, taking long walks through the village without Dakota's full support. Her legs, once frail and untrustworthy, now carried her with a steady rhythm, though she occasionally leaned on him for reassurance. Each step was a testament to her resilience and to the quiet, unwavering faith Dakota had placed in her from the very beginning. She had become more than a patient. She was now an active participant in village life. The children ran to her for lessons in herb gathering. The older women sought her help with cooking and repairs, and the men acknowledged her presence with respect. She marveled at how far she had come, from the frightened girl carried across the prairie to someone whose own strength now inspired others. Dakota watched all of this silently, his pride visible only in the way his eyes followed her every movement, in the rare, faint smile that tugged at his lips when she accomplished something new. There was a subtle intimacy in these moments, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond had deepened beyond simple survival. Clara's progress was both a personal triumph and a shared victory, a reflection of their partnership. One afternoon, as they walked along a trail that wound through the hills, Clara stopped to rest under a tall cottonwood. She turned to Dakota, her face flushed with exertion and the thrill of her independence. I never thought I'd be able to do this," she admitted, her voice soft. "I feared I'd always need to be carried. But now," she let her words hang, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Dakota knelt beside her, his hand brushing hers, warm and reassuring. "You see what you are capable of," he said quietly. "Not because of me, but because you believed you could. And belief is the greatest strength a person can have." Clara's heart swelled. She realized in that moment that her dependence on him had evolved into a partnership. He had carried her through storms, through fear and through danger. But she had carried herself through recovery, through courage, and through the hard work of trusting again. And now, their bond was no longer defined by necessity, but by choice, affection, and love. That evening, the village celebrated the successful harvest of herbs and vegetables. Clara moved among the villagers confidently, her steps steady and assured. Dakota remained close, his eyes always returning to her, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. At one point, he placed a gentle hand on her back to guide her through the crowd, and she felt a thrill of warmth at the touch. It was no longer merely support, it was intimacy, a promise of connection that transcended words. Later, as the fire burned low and the stars shimmered above the village, Clara and Dakota sat together on a hillside overlooking the valley. The world seemed still and endless, as if holding its breath in reverence for what they had endured. Clara rested her head against Dakota's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and allowed herself to speak freely. "I've changed," she said softly, "not just physically, but in everything. I feel alive again. I feel like I belong somewhere, with someone who truly sees me." Dakota's hand brushed her hair gently, his touch tender and deliberate. "You do belong," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Here with me, with your people, with yourself. And I see you, Clara. I always have." Her breath caught in her throat. It was more than words, more than a declaration. It was a recognition of everything they had endured together. The storms, the fall, the recovery, the fear, the trust, and the love that had grown quietly in the spaces between. She realized that she had not only regained the ability to walk, but she had also reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her heart. Dakota leaned closer, his lips brushing the side of her temple, and Clara closed her eyes, savoring the moment. It was gentle, unhurried, and intimate, a physical manifestation of the trust, care, and deep affection that had defined their journey. She understood now that their bond was not merely survival or protection. It was partnership. It was love, and it was the kind of connection that endured through hardship and emerged stronger for it. And as they sat together, the firelight reflecting in their eyes and the stars above witnessing their quiet triumph, Clara knew with unwavering certainty that she had found her home, not just in the village, not just in the prairie, but in Dakota's steadfast presence and the love they had built together. Spring arrived in the valley with a gentle promise, painting the hills in shades of green and gold. Clara walked through the village without assistance, her steps confident, her posture proud. Her legs, once frail and uncertain, now carried her with grace and strength. She had healed not just physically but emotionally and spiritually, and the transformation was undeniable. Every person she passed, every child who waved, every elder who nodded in respect, reminded her of how far she had come. Dakota walked beside her, not as a crutch but as a companion, a partner, and a lover. Their hands brushed occasionally, lingering in a quiet intimacy that spoke volumes. They had grown together through storms, danger, and fear. They had shared vulnerability, trust, and love, and now the bond between them was solid, unshakable, and full of promise. One morning, Dakota led her to the top of a gentle hill overlooking the valley. The village lay spread beneath them, quiet and peaceful, the river glinting like silver in the sunlight. He paused, turning to her with a rare softness in his eyes. "Look at what we have," he said. "All of this, it is ours to protect, to cherish." Clara felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "We've survived so much," she murmured, her eyes tracing the paths they had walked, the places where he had carried her, the shelter that had protected them. "I never imagined I could feel this. Free, this alive." Dakota reached for her hand, holding it with a gentle firmness. "Freedom is not given, Clara, it is earned. Step by step, choice by choice, you have earned it. And I am proud to walk beside you. Not to carry you, but with you." For a moment, they stood in silence, letting the wind play through their hair, letting the beauty of the valley and the strength of their bond fill them completely. Then Dakota spoke again, his voice low and intimate. "I have carried you through storms, across lands, through danger. And yet, the greatest journey has been this, learning to love you, to trust you, to be part of your life." Clara felt her heart swell. She had feared dependence, feared weakness, feared that her injury had marked the end of everything she had known. But now she understood. It had been the beginning of a new life. Dakota had not only carried her physically, he had carried her heart, her fears, and her hope. And she had carried him too in her trust, her courage, and her willingness to embrace love. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was a lifetime of unspoken promises. To protect one another, to face every danger together, to share every joy, and to build a life bound by choice, respect, and deep abiding love. Dakota leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was gentle, affirming, and filled with the tenderness of everything they had endured together. Clara responded, her arms wrapping around him, feeling the strength and safety of his presence. It was a kiss that spoke of survival, of trust, and of a future built together, step by step, side by side. As the sun rose higher, spilling gold across the valley, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She had been carried through storms literally and figuratively, but now she walked freely both in body and heart. Her life, once marked by fear and helplessness, was now rich with love, purpose, and possibility. Together, Clara and Dakota descended the hill hand in hand, returning to the village that had become their home. The children ran to greet them, the villagers smiled, and the river's gentle song seemed to echo the rhythm of their hearts. Clara knew, without question, that she had found her place in the world, not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who had learned to trust, to love, and to live fully. And beside her, Dakota shared in that truth, carrying nothing but hope, love, and the promise of a lifetime together. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, vast and untamed, yet no longer threatening. They had survived it, conquered it, and most importantly had found each other in it. And in that boundless open land, Clara and Dakota began the rest of their lives, strong, healed, and in love, step by step, together.